Welcome to the July 2022 CALS Comm workshop. We will be talking about search engine optimization, and the two presenters are Kristin Sargent, who handles content strategy for the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and Alastair Hadden, who is the Director of Marketing Content for University Communications. Thank you both so much for joining us today. You are tagged in.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen real quick. Okay. Oh, hold on one second. All right. Okay, sorry. Can everyone see?
Looks good.
Okay, great. All right. Hi, everyone. So we're here to talk about SEO and some simple, I guess I would call them simple tips or things that you can do strategically over the course of time to help get seen on search engines, mostly Google. So the first thing to talk about is, what is SEO? Search engine optimization refers to the process of improving your site's organic traffic and ranking on search engines such as Google and Bing and any other search engines you could think of. So, yep. And Janine, you're going to admit new people as they come in, right?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the first things to think about with SEO is obviously this whole concept of, well, how does it work? So essentially all search engines have like this common goal of solving a search query from the user. And, you know, it works by demonstrating search engines for your content, and the best results eventually show up on the SERPs, which is your search results page on Google, which is that page one when you first go to Google and you type in your search query. But all of these things essentially on this screen, so site speed, loading time, keywords, content keywords, you know, also user experience, is it mobile friendly? They all go into SEO and your ranking within Google search. And so here's some numbers as to why SEO is important for your overall strategy with doing content. Apologies for my voice. 68% of online experiences begin with a search engine, and 53% of that web traffic comes from organic search. And then, you know, the startling number, 93%, is that it all comes from Google, whether that's Google search, someone typing in a search query, or Google Images, or through Google Maps. So there's actually two forms of SEO. And sorry, I'm just getting my notes. And Google reviews can heavily affect search engine rankings. But the two forms of SEO that we want to talk about is on-site SEO and off-site SEO. And as you can see here, on-site SEO is really the one that you have the most control of. This is where you kind of decide what your site structure is going to look like, or your page structure, or your story structure. You know, is it easy to navigate? It's also how you can, you know, structure your page speed. You know, do you have too large images within your story, your content, or on your websites? And then, of course, content, posting quality content that's both relevant to the search query and also using keywords. And we're going to talk a little bit more about keywords in a couple more slides. But offsite SEO is anything that you do off your website to improve your ranking. That means popularity of your website, relevance, authority, and reviews. And offsite SEO I know there were some questions for those of you who had signed up about backlinks. Backlinks, and there's a slide about that, and we'll talk about that a little later on. That is part of the offsite SEO. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the main one that we're going to focus on today is on-site SEO and things that you can do. Hopefully I haven't lost anyone yet. Oops. So easy things to do now: keywords, title tags and meta descriptions, optimizing images, and making URLs SEO friendly. These are 4 things that I think for anyone who wants to start having SEO part of their overall content strategy, these are 4 things that you can start doing today. And do realize SEO doesn't happen overnight. Increased rankings on Google isn't going to happen overnight. It's a long haul approach to get seen. So the first thing we're going to talk about is keywords. And so these are the 3 types of keywords through SEO. You have your head terms, which is your generic keyword. And in this example, I used gardening or garden as a general one-word topic. Body keywords or your broad match keywords are usually a 2 to 3 word phrase. So again, keeping up with the theme of gardening or garden, you would, for this example, I did spring vegetable garden or spring vegetable gardening. And a long tail keyword, this is usually the sentences that make up the majority of searches. Essentially, when you're in Google, you might look up what vegetables to plant for my spring garden, or when to plant a spring vegetable garden. Most of us, when we're in Google, that's more commonly what we would type in is a question more than just spring gardening. Plus long tail keywords, you're making it more specific to the actual topic of someone's search relevance of what they're actually looking for. So the long tail keywords are very important as part of keeping the structure, but making sure that you keep your head term as that basis in your long tail keywords. And in content writing, like I said, you want to make sure the head term or that main topic is carried throughout both your body keywords in your story, your headline, your excerpt. So that's things to keep in mind. So the next thing to talk about is title tags and meta descriptions. So obviously in Google, I'm using the same example of when to plant a spring vegetable garden. Here were some of the top results that came on the search engine results page, which again, that's SERPs. So you can see I've put it here like the 2022 planting calendar, when to start vegetable seeds, early spring gardening, what to plant and when. Those are your title tags. And as you can see, keeping in that theme of spring garden, those words are clearly, or vegetable, are seen in the title tags. And then the meta description is that 1 to 2 sentence below that shows up in your search results that also has your main keywords in there so that people can get an idea. One thing to know for Google, title tags, again, they're the clickable headlines, but for a search engine, Google typically displays only the first 50 to 60 characters of a headline or a page title. So you'll want to try and keep headlines to that character limit. And, again, best practices for those title tags would be include that target keyword, which was gardening or vegetable gardening, spring garden. Write a title that matches search intent, which again here, when to plant a spring vegetable garden. These title tags represent that: early spring gardening, what to plant and when to start vegetable seeds, and keep it descriptive. And then the meta description, that again, that's the brief summary that shows up. And again, you want to include your, target keywords, which are your head terms, match search intent, again, with that excerpt, and then provide an accurate summary of the content that someone, when they click on that title tag, they're going to receive. I see something in chat, Janine.
I got it. You're all good.
Okay. All right. So that's one thing. And so another thing to keep in mind with SEO, believe it or not, images do play a role in your search engine results in your rankings on Google. You know, Google's not going to rank a page if it takes so long to load or load the images. So here are some things to consider when you're optimizing your images with your story or on your website. Make sure you're providing alt text for all of your images. And again, in the alt text, you might want to include some of those key terms that we're carrying throughout. Choose the best file format, JPEG, PNG. You can also compress your images, and I'm actually going to share some compression tools with you on the next slide. And then make sure to resize your images. You know, I know the university standard size for most stories is the 1500 by 844. And then, you know, I think keeping them, I want to say smaller than, oh gosh, I can't remember the exact number, but the smaller the file, like the actual compression file size is better for site loading without losing its original look.
I might just add a couple more
Go ahead.
things about images and image sizing. If you're using the NC State web platform or similar, WordPress itself does do some image compression and tries to shrink things down or serve images at a size that makes sense to the size of the browser window. But it is still better if the image that you put in the first place is already in good shape and not gigantic. And then on alt text, that is the text that is read out by screen readers for people who are blind or visually impaired. And so Kristin's absolutely right that it does have SEO value. Google does look at the words that are in there to try and figure out what the image is of. But I will caution you that your first responsibility is to make sure that that alt text is useful for someone who is looking at that image. Historically, people have stuffed all sorts of keywords into alt text to try and goose SEO. And the best thing you want to do is make sure that that image describes what that image is for someone who can't see it. One other thing about images that's slightly scary is that Google is now getting to the point where it can actually see the content of an image to some degree. So historically, it relied upon the file name and the alt text, etc., to know that this is a picture of a panda. Increasingly, Google is able to look at the image and say, that's an image of a panda, and match that to searches, which is kind of an emerging thing. The technology is getting better and better, but it is something to consider when you're choosing images for your site, that they sort of fit with the content of the page, the written content, that you're using original images that don't appear elsewhere on the internet, things like that, because increasingly that's going to be important.
And Alastair makes a good point about stuffing keywords. That's one of the things too within your like meta description. And when you put in metadata for your story or your web pages, stuffing too many keywords, that's something also I think Google will ding you for. You do want to keep it very precise as far as keeping that head term and then using that to kind of fuel that whole search intent. So yeah. And again, here are some of the image compression tools that you can use. Again, these are just some options that if you need to compress your photos, you can try these. And Alastair, I didn't know if you wanted to add any other details about Squoosh or anything like that.
I don't think so. I think all of these sort of do the same thing. Squoosh is just particularly easy to look at because it lets you see the image before and after. So you can see if you're stripping out too much information and starting to make the picture look less good. Again, if you're using the NC State web platform, like Kristin said, pretty much all the images that we use, with the exception of some headshots and things for profile pictures, are in that 16:9 ratio and usually 1500 by 844. So you can aim for that. If there's one thing that we would love, it's that if people were more consistently using that 16:9 ratio, sometimes people upload something that isn't quite that ratio and it looks slightly strange. But I think all of these more or less do a similar thing and help you get to a place where you're helping with page load times.
Okay. All right. So one of the next things is SEO friendly URLs. If you are using WordPress, There is a way where you can, many of us, I say many of us, there are instances in where I've seen very long headlines throughout some of the content on NC State, or for those of you who are familiar with Newswire from other entities or colleges and departments, I've seen quotes in headlines. But one of the easiest things to do is you can still have a nice descriptive headline, but you can actually alter, if you're in WordPress and the NC State system, you can alter your URL to make it a little bit more SEO friendly. And I'm going to show that to you after here in a minute. But again, I think using that same example of gardening, here was something that came up from creativevegetablegardener.com, and I need to move you all. And it says vegetables to plant in spring. That could kind of be shortened down to just spring vegetables to plant instead of using the extra word in. But you can actually change that within WordPress. And I can show you that. Actually, I'll do that now. Let's see here. I guess I need to stop sharing to reshare WordPress, correct? Probably.
Yeah, I think so.
I think so, yeah.
Or I mean, you might be able
Okay.
to just do this plus up here.
Let me. So I'm just going to go the way that I always go. Oh, I meant to do add new.
And Kristin, in this space, I was hoping that maybe you could also show the like metadata where where that might go within the back end of WordPress.
Sure. So for those of you who are familiar with WordPress, this is the block look right now, but when you do a post, obviously title, you can do a subtitle as well. But down here is where it has the metadata. And as you can see here in the description, it says your suggested character limit is 50 to 160. That's for the description. That's that part of the meta description that I showed you in the previous slide, whereas the title tag is more of your headline for your story, which would go here. So I'm going to just do, I'm trying to think of a very long headline that I could shorten. What vegetables should I plant during early spring? So if you look over here to the right of my screen, you could do there's a custom URL, but under that, there's the permalink.
You might need to save the draft before it
Oh, you're right.
creates the actual URL string.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. So this might be considered a little too long. So what we could change this to trim it up for keeping some of those head terms, I probably would do I might change it to just vegetables to plant early spring, or planting early spring vegetables, as changing it to be a little bit more SEO friendly. So, but like I said, but what Janine had pointed to earlier, you would do your search engine description, and this is highly recommended. I've noticed there are some folks who don't put this in, but in addition to the description here, you can still create an excerpt which shows up on your website. That can be a little bit longer than your search engine description. But just remember, you want to keep the most important part in this description that matches the search request, like what people are searching for, but also keep some of your head term target keywords, but then it doesn't get cut off by Google. You can also add an image to go along with that. So
Kristin, there's a question about the extension web portal pages. Would you go back to the WordPress?
yes.
So for those of you who are still using the previous WordPress editor, it's right under the title, the way you can change the permalink. It's like directly under the title. You just there's a little edit button and you can change it. But
are we talking about basically ces.ncsu.edu? Because I'm not sure that uses WordPress at all. I'm actually not familiar what it uses, but
it does use WordPress, but
okay.
I've never seen the back end of it, so I have no idea what it looks like on the back
It
end.
even looks different than the classic WordPress, Alastair.
Okay,
It's
yeah,
different.
there probably are the same options in there somewhere, but you'd have to hunt for them. I've never seen it, so I'd have to poke around in there. But I'm sure that the same options are available somewhere in there.
Yeah, we could talk with Julie and Justin on our CALS Comm team and see if we can get access so that maybe we can provide a little bit more helpful tips about where to find some of these things on the extension website.
And again, you can do meta description. So one of the things for social, and a lot of times in content and stories that I personally have written, there are times where I actually change the title. So what would show up on social media when you post a link, you have that title card, which usually has the photo. It'll have the headline. It'll have that description that you've put in there. And then the link. And so a lot of times thinking about how people are interested on clicking on a story on social media could be different than how someone is looking for something through a Google search. So again, with this particular, keeping in the same theme of what vegetables to plant during early spring, maybe for this title on Facebook would be your guide to vegetable spring planting, giving it that more of a guide, or maybe they think it's more of a list of, here's some, we have a couple of photos of the different spring vegetables that you want to plant, and giving some information about each one, like the key times, which month. And then, you can have your description. This description, suggested, it says 30 characters. I do know, because again, within social media platforms, if it's too long, you'll get that ... So if you want someone to be able to read the full description, try to stick with the suggested character limits that WordPress is providing. And you can also have a different image than the one that you have for the feature here in this story, if you wanted to, or you could have a different image than the one that was through Google. It all depends on what you think someone might click on social. If it was, we don't want to use graphics, but mostly photos. But I'm just letting you know that these all can be different, or they can all be the same. It's really up to your preference.
Yeah. And if you leave all of these fields blank, Google or Facebook or whoever at the Open Graph Protocol will try to fill them in for you, and they will probably do a worse job. So they'll take the first image on the page, or they'll grab some random text from the page that they think is relevant. So it's better to just take the time to control how those things appear elsewhere.
Yep.
Kristin, if you popped over to the employee portal dashboard, you could see like a traditional, the traditional editor look, if that's. Test it.
CALS. I know I did. There it is. Okay. Because it says CALS in front of it.
I know.
Okay. So add new. Okay. Yeah, and I want to say in this, the old version, the classic, you actually have an option to put in keywords, which that I went away with the new WordPress or Gutenberg. So this was an option to include words. So for your target keywords, or you could even do for your search results, like, you know, you would do it without commas and spaces. So what to plant in spring, you know, spring. And you would just fill this out. And again, meta description here, it has 115 characters. And it does cut you off. So you'll obviously want to be as precise. So you still have the same options of doing a Facebook title. If you want that different than your web title, your description, you know, then you'd also have your excerpt area. And then let's see here. So I would need to save draft. And Janine, you can delete this later. And I gotta find, I haven't been in this one in a long time, so I gotta figure out where the URL would be.
It's up top.
Oh, it's up at the top.
Yeah, you can click
Here
on
you go.
the edit there.
Yep, under the title. So here it has it as internet news, you know, spring. You know, and that's what you could do. And change it there. So, and again, when you add,
I actually was just able to log into the extension WordPress. Who knew I had access? And it looks a lot like the classic.
okay. Okay. All right. So those are the 4 things for your on-site SEO. So keywords, the title tags in your descriptions that you can do within your content or on your web pages, the optimizing images and either compressing them if you need to with those compression tools, and then the SEO friendly URLs. So one of the last things to talk about, which some of you had mentioned that you were interested in understanding, backlinks. So very simply, backlinks it's a way that gives you authority. And this is where other websites are linking to your page or to your content. So for example, you know, there's been times where some of the stories that we've done, you know, New York, what am I thinking of? Not the New York Post, New York Times. There's been research stories that the New York Times has written about, and they've linked back to some of our work and some of the things that we've done through CALS. And I know the same has been true probably for some of the content that University Communications News Services have posted. And that kind of gives you authority. But one of the things, and like with having an ncsu.edu domain, and you're already connected with higher education, you know, you already have that type of authority. And Alastair, I think you have a little bit more explanation as to kind of how that works.
Yeah. I think one advantage that anyone who's working for NC State and publishing something in the ncsu.edu domain has is that domain itself. So if you are working from any site that has ncsu.edu in it, Google is considering the fact that you are part of that broader website, and it trusts our website very highly, partly because it's a .edu. So the .edu domain is actually regulated to a certain degree. Only accredited higher education institutions can have one, and Google tends to trust them very highly. It thinks of them as expert or authority, so they tend to do better in search results. And also, just by being part of ncsu.edu, you are part of a huge web of content that is being produced all across the university from every part of it, every college and department, every unit. There's a lot of original, trustworthy content, and Google says, I know a really good place to go for trustworthy information. It's ncsu.edu. So you are benefiting from everyone else's work all the time. It would be very different if you were setting up your own sort of small business or something and you create a new .com. Google doesn't know anything about that .com yet. It takes a while for it to trust it and build up that authority. Just by working for NC State, you already have a huge advantage in SEO. There's a company called Moz, it's M-O-Z, who have a bunch of SEO tools, some of which I think are free, and they try to figure out what domain authority is under the hood and rank it from 1 to 100. And I think NC State's at like 91 or something. So basically we're in the upper echelons of websites that are trusted by Google. So just by publishing on the NC State website, you've got a leg up on a lot of other people.
Right. And there, and as I mentioned before with that offsite SEO and things that you can do not directly on your website. So you can actually work towards building quality backlinks. And one of the ways that they suggest, well, SEMrush kind of suggests is, looking at competitors and seeing some of the target keywords that they use. But again, there's a link here for their backlink gap tool. So you can use it to analyze your backlink profiles of up to 5 competitors for like building your backlink library. So that's just a tool that you can use, that you can explore. And so that's basically kind of how backlinks work. I would say that one probably takes a little bit longer, more than what you can do on your website, since it does kind of require you, I'll leave it here though. It does require you to put in that effort of, I think, promoting your content and having it be relevant to other entities who might be interested in some of the content that you're providing or web pages and information that you have. But here are some final takeaways, and Alastair, I'll let you talk about this. Oh, you're on mute, Alastair.
I think SEO can sometimes be a little bit mystifying or scary to people. And the truth is that Google themselves don't fully understand how it works anymore, because their algorithms are basically self-refining algorithms that try to learn the best way to serve information to people based on queries. And they can no longer tell you what results will show up if you type in a particular query in a particular place, because it depends not just on the content on those websites, but things like your location, your previous search history, even queries that you may have typed in the same session. It's trying to work from those. And so it becomes kind of scary to think about. I think there's also the technical side and there's the content side. And the technical side has a lot of stuff to it that is pretty much taken care of by using like WordPress well, doing a lot of the things that Kristin talked about, things like page load time, mobile optimization, things like that. A lot of those are taken care of for you by just using these platforms. So you have to worry about them less. The content you do have to worry about more. And I think when people ask me for, basic SEO advice, I say that really what you have to understand is that what Google is trying to do is give human users information that is useful to them. And so if you write information that is useful for people, if it answers the questions that they have, if it matches the kind of queries they're typing into Google, they are probably going to find it. Google also likes information that is original, so it's not copied from anywhere, it's not duplicating information. They like when it's densely full of keywords or related keywords, some of that long tail stuff that Kristin talks about. One thing to consider is that increasingly people type long questions into Google, either because they found that that's the most successful way to do it. There's also the rise of smart devices. So people say Siri or Hey Google, they'll just say a full question. So increasingly those work very well. There's also been kind of a crisis in the last few years more generally of trustworthy information on the internet. And so Google has taken this very seriously and has taken a lot of steps to try and ensure that information is what they call EAT, which is like they're valuing websites that have expertise, authority, and trustworthiness, which gives us a huge advantage. But above all, my advice usually is if you want to have your pages or your content or your posts rank on Google, think about human users first. So Google tries to read pages the way a human user would. It likes a straightforward structure. It likes there to be a heading that's predictable, subheadings that are predictable, sentences that are useful, that are helping people. If you write content that serves humans first, then Google will follow. I think historically SEO had a lot more tricks to it, where you would try to trick Google, or you would try to stuff something full of keywords, or you would have all these different approaches. They're increasingly good at spotting that. And if you put your human user first and think about what they need and write content that answers those needs, that's probably the single best piece of advice that I can give you. Also, to Kristin's point at the start, Google is SEO is kind of like a long game. It's not about one thing that you did on one post. It's about lots of small choices and decisions that add up, doing that metadata consistently, using keywords consistently, publishing content that answers questions, filling in the gaps in your content that people might have. It's going to be a long haul thing and a long-term strategy, and sort of raising all the boats of your content by doing all of this well over the long haul. But also, I think, if it's reassuring, like I said, just by being an ncsu.edu, you have an advantage with a lot of that. So if there's one thing I think that helps with all of this, I think it's watching your own search behavior or how you use the internet. So the next time you go to Google and type something in, think about why you typed those words. Think about, is this how someone would find this thing? What steps do you take? Or if you can watch other users, especially people of your website, like ask them to look for something on your website and see what they search for in Google. And sort of work backward from that. That can be some of the best keyword research. I think it demystifies it sometimes if you think about the way you use the internet and the way other people use the internet, and sort of work from there to think about how someone might find the content on your site or your posts, those kinds of things. Google is trying to close that gap where the difference between the robots that are crawling the internet and the humans that are using the internet is smaller and smaller and smaller until the robots are basically treating the internet the way a human would. And so the way to stay ahead of that is to make sure that your content that you create is for people first and foremost.
That ends the presentation. So now I'm going to put up to questions. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Are there any additional questions that anyone might have? Nope. Okay.
Kristin, were there any question trends in the sign up form that were?
I got to go back. I don't have the sign up form pulled up. I should have done that. Give me a second.
I guess I'm a little still confused about backlinks. Can you?
So, like
Kristin,
I said,
you go.
Go ahead.
So basically, Google, like I said, is always looking for things that are expert, that are trusted, that are authoritative. And one of the ways it judges this is, do other places on the internet link to this content? Because that's a way of judging. Someone else who created a link somewhere else on the internet thinks that this place is the place to go for this information.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say it's the planting spring vegetables thing. If you create that piece and it goes up on the internet and no one ever links to it, Google might trust it. It might think it's a good place to go for that information, but it's going to trust it more if it finds that there are 500 websites on the internet that all link to this place as the definitive place to learn about spring vegetables. Now, to a certain degree, you can't control who links to your website. I mean, people do. There's a whole industry out there of like manufacturing backlinks and a whole content mill stuff out there that's trying to cheat Google a little bit by doing this. But for the most part, again, if you write the most helpful content you can, and you're publicizing it well and you're putting it out there in the world for people to find, you're going to get more backlinks. There are some ways you can try to promote a little bit more, like, for example, sharing articles on Reddit or things like that. There's some potential pitfalls to that too. But we find, I think one way you can look into this is I mentioned Moz before. I think they have some free tools. Some of them are paid, but if you go to moz.com, they have some research stuff, including a backlinks tool that you can basically put in the URL of your post or page, and it will show you some of the places that link to it potentially. Again, it's a holistic thing. It's not like a silver bullet that one site linked to your page. I mean, it's great if the New York Times links to something we did. We get a bunch of traffic from that, and Google says, well, the New York Times trusts it. But it's more of a holistic thing that your site and all the content on your site is getting linked to from other places. Google's like, okay, human users thought that this was good enough to point to, that they trust it more. Backlinks can potentially break. WordPress does do a lot to resolve this. Some of it automatically, and some of it you can control. If the URL changes, it will usually redirect you to the place. I think, for example, WordPress now automatically, if you change the stub or the URL of a post, it remembers that it used to be called the other thing and will redirect that traffic to the new place. So some of that does happen. It is worth thinking about over time if you're changing your website or updating your links, or refreshing your website entirely and creating new ones. When you go through that process, one good step is to get a list of all the pages and posts that are in your site, and try to think about where you would send them on the new website and do some of that redirect strategy. We do that as part of our general refresh strategy, but some of this does just sort of happen automatically. It's also generally not the end of the world if something does break over long haul, but chances are someone won't. Again, like a lot of SEO is about aggregate things. It's like lots of small things that add up to a big thing. One broken link or one thing here or there isn't going to make or break your SEO. It's the sum of lots and lots of choices made by human users using the internet over a very long time. So it's more about like having a consistent process of doing things well, taking some of the steps that Kristin listed when you create a post. If there are some ways that you can promote something or get someone out in the world to point to your content, great. You can have a backlink strategy where you try to reach out to blogs or other places and say, hey, we created this post, can you link to it? Things like that. But a lot of it is just getting up every day and doing the right thing when you create content, and doing that for a long time. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Any other questions? Hopefully this wasn't too over the head. It's definitely, like I said, SEO, it is a long strategic approach with content. And to Alastair's point, it's, doing the little things that could help, but on a regular, consistent basis, and just trying to remember to do those little things.
Well, thanks so much to Kristin and Alastair. I really appreciate you all coming and presenting on search engine optimization today. The next CALS workshop is going to be on August 4th in the same place, in the same time, on a different day. We are going to talk about CALS tailgate exhibitors, like how to be a great CALS tailgate exhibitor, what are some of the rules or recommendations. And this year, a little bit different than past years, it's totally open to the public. No tickets are truly needed. They are asking people to register ahead of time. So that's an excellent opportunity to share information about your group with members of the university football community, people who are interested to learn more, along with longtime CALS stakeholders. So again, thanks so much to Kristin and Alastair. Everybody, this information will be emailed out via probably the next 24 hours to everyone who has registered. Thanks so much for coming.